Hey everyone, welcome to my Introduction to Analytics course. Now this course is designed for people that are brand new to the analytics field. So if you've never worked with SQL, Excel pivot tables, Tableau or Power BI, databases, any of that stuff, then this is for you. And if those terms sound really foreign to you, don't worry. We're going to get into all that and I'm going to make it all make perfect sense to you. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a junior high school student or you have multiple PhDs. I'm going to make this course really fun, really simple for you to get started and get a feel for what it's like to work as an analyst. After taking this course, you're going to walk away with three important things. First, you're going to have confidence that you know what it's like to be an analyst and that you can become an analyst. The second thing is you're going to have an understanding of the key tools that we use in this field to do our jobs. And the third thing you're going to gain is some brief real-world experience of being that data analyst to help you make your determination of whether or not this is the right field for you. But I really hope that it is because I love this field and I've been doing this for 20 years. With that, I am super excited that you're here, so let's go ahead and dive into the course. I'd like to kick this course off by giving you an overview of what we're going to be dealing with in this course today. In this course, we're going to start off by talking about what it's like to be an analyst, how much money you can make, and what the job market looks like, because I'm sure if you're thinking about going into the analytics field, you want to make sure that there's actually a decent enough income that's there and there's enough jobs available for you when you get done with your analytics training. After that, we're going to dive right into some of the tools and a demo of an analytics exercise. This is where you're going to learn and see some of the new tools that we use. This is your Excel, the pivot tables, the dashboards, SQL database. And I'm going to make this super easy for you, and I'm going to make it simple because I'm going to connect this to something that hopefully you're all very familiar with. After you've been armed with that knowledge, this is where I'm going to turn the keys over to you, and you're going to work with that data and some of the tools that I've taught you, and this is where you're going to perform work like an analyst. And you can do this, trust me. I'm going to make this really easy as we go through, so fear not. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is the course wrap-up. And this is where I'm going to give a summary of the course, provide some resources to help you get started and continue your education in the analytics field. What does a data analyst do? Well, a data analyst collects information, they organize it in a certain way, and then they prepare a presentation of that information, present it back to stakeholders, and that information gets used to make business decisions. Now, this might sound a little scary on the surface or very in-depth and complex, but it's actually more familiar than most people realize. And this is because you've been doing analysis work your entire life, whether or not you realize it. So here's a few examples. When you go to leave your house in the morning, do you put a jacket on? If you do or don't, you've made that decision based on some sort of data that you've collected. Now, all that data resides in your head, and it's based on your experiences, right? So depending on the time of year it is, the time of day, you might say, I'm probably going to need a jacket. It might be cold outside or it might be rainy outside. You have those data points. They're just in your brain instead of being listed down on an Excel spreadsheet or something else like that. The same is true if you like sports. So if you think about your favorite sports team, are they going to win next year? Are they going to win the next game? Well, how would you answer that question? I'm guessing that you probably answer that question based on their past performance. If they've been having a great season, they've been winning a lot of games, you might say, yeah, they're probably going to continue winning and they'll probably win that next game of the season. Again, this is based on data. These are data points that are collected inside your head, some people like to get into it and they'll keep a spreadsheet going. And these are things that you've been analyzing every day. You can take this anywhere, such as groceries. Do I need to buy more food, a specific food item at the grocery store? You've analyzed how much is in your pantry, and you've analyzed what your needs are for upcoming dishes and meals that you want to cook, and you've been able to make a determination of, do I need to purchase more of this additional grocery item? So that's really all that's happening in the analytics field. The difference is we're just applying it to business situations instead of your personal life situations, and we're being a little bit more formal about things because we're putting the data into spreadsheets or databases, and we're using special tools to just extract that information out and to put that information back in. So hopefully that sounds really simple. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, and that's what we're going to look at here in some of our examples, is something that is really familiar to most people, and we're going to talk through it with tools that are familiar to you as well before we start building upon that on the more complex tools such as the visualization tools, those dashboards and Tableau and Power BI, and SQL in the database, as that might be new to you as well. Now, I want to give you an example of analytics in the business world. We mentioned groceries in the last example there. And if you're the grocery store in this case instead of the customer, well, what does the grocery store care about? Well, the grocery store wants to do analysis on you, the customer, because they're trying to figure out what you might buy, because that's going to dictate how much inventory they need to carry. So if they know a little bit about you and that you buy a loaf of bread every week at the grocery store, they can take that information from all of their customers and determine how much inventory they need to carry and put on the shelves. If they don't do a great job at this, either by ordering too little or ordering too much, they could run into business problems. So in the case of the grocery store, if they order too little, well, customers aren't going to be happy. You're not going to be happy because you couldn't get that loaf of bread, and the business is losing out on sales. However, if they order too much, they also have a problem because that's a perishable item and it might get wasted. It would be considered spoilage to the business, and they're going to have to throw it out, and they're going to lose money because of it. So neither of those things are good situations, but the business will use analysis and data in order to make these calculations and estimates to figure out how to operate their business in the most efficient and optimal way and profitable way as possible. Now, the next thing that you're probably wondering is, how much money do I make in this field? It sounds exciting. Well, if we look at this screenshot here from Indeed, the job search engine, you can see at the low end, people are making roughly $47,000, but it climbs all the way to $110,000 for more experienced folks, with the median salary being around $72,000 a year. Now, this varies by region of the country, and it also varies by the level of experience of the person in the field. One of the things that Indeed calls out is that a lot of folks in the field do have a 4-year bachelor's degree. However, it's not a requirement that you have that getting in the field within most companies. Yes, it can help increase your salary and open more doors for you, but if you don't have it, there's plenty of people that have been able to get into the data analytics field without that, and they do so by understanding fundamental knowledge of the tools and having a really good head on their shoulders in terms of being able to think through business problems and adapt or learn some of the new tools and techniques really rapidly. The faster that you learn these things and the more experience that you gain, the higher your salary is going to go. I look at the data analyst position as a launching point for a lot of people's careers. Now, the reason that I say this is because when you learn the foundational knowledge of the data, the tools, the business, you're going to be able to do anything. You can become a business intelligence engineer. You can become a data engineer, a data scientist. You can even go into project management or product management and a few other fields in addition to that. So if you're thinking about getting into this field, there's a lot of potential here on where you can take your career, and there's a good amount of salary that's on the table for you as well. Another thing that I'll call out when it comes to compensation is that those other positions that I mentioned tend to pay more than a data analyst position. The data analyst position is usually considered non-technical in nature, and it's a great starting point for a lot of people. As you get into more technical positions or higher level positions, those pay grades are a little bit different, and you can expect to make a lot more money. How much more money? Well, I've seen people that are making hundreds, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, even $500,000 a year in their field as you start to get that higher level experience and you go into data science and other fields of that nature. The next logical question that comes up is, will there be a job there for me when I get done with my training? And the answer to that is more than likely yes. The job market is actually growing faster than most other job markets when it comes to the data analyst positions that are out there. The other thing about the job market and positions is that every company needs a data analyst and needs teams of data analysts to help them understand the business and make business decisions. This is how business decisions are made. Back in the old days, before people had access to a whole bunch of data, some of this was done via spreadsheets, and a lot of business decisions were made via gut feeling. And that's just not the way that things really work anymore. They're dependent on data analysts to help drive and guide a lot of the business decisions that are happening. If that all sounds wonderful to you, then the next question I'm guessing you have is, how do we get started in this field? Well, here's the deal. You're already getting started by taking this course. This course is giving you that introduction to the field, and it's giving you an introduction to some of the tools that we use in the field. After you take this course, I have other courses that you can take that are going to help you understand the foundational knowledge of some of the tools and technologies that we work with to build you into an expert level analyst. Now, I've done this throughout my entire career. I've been in the tech field for 20 years, and I've worked at some of the biggest companies out there, such as eBay, Amazon, Python, and others where I've built world-class data analysts and analytics engineering teams, and I'm going to do the same for you in my training program to make you one of the best analysts that are out there. So let's go ahead and dive into the actual demo exercise so you can see those tools and see what we actually do as an analyst. Okay, we're at the demo section here, but before we dive into everything, I want to give you a few tips to work with when going through this part of the course. In this part of the course, I'm going to start off by talking about things from the perspective of Excel because I feel like most people are familiar with Excel, and a database isn't all that different from Excel, and neither is the visualization tool Tableau or Power BI, but we're going to use Tableau in this case. I have a couple tips for you as we go through this course. So when you're taking this course, I highly recommend that you approach this just from an observation standpoint, and then after you observe, you can go back and repeat this exercise by doing the hands-on portion of it. I really like this approach because what I feel tends to happen is that as people are trying to learn, they're trying to do at the same time, and that just doesn't work. So think about being in school. If you're feverishly trying to take notes and everything else, you're not necessarily hearing the instructor, and that's going to stunt your learning growth if you go that route. So tip there again is to just watch it one time through. Then after you understand kind of the high level of what's going on and you have visibility of those tools, you may only remember like 5, maybe 20% of what you saw, but that's okay. Then you can go back and rewatch it and you can start doing that hands-on learning at that time, and that will solidify your understanding of the program that I'm talking about here today. The next thing that I want to call out is that in this demo, I'm going to be working with some Amazon transaction data. Now, I put this in the download links inside of the course so you can use that file that we're going to be working with. However, if you want to work with your own Amazon transaction data, you can go out to the Amazon website if you happen to be a customer and download your own transactions. That way you can analyze what data you have available as well. Let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at this in Excel. So I have this Amazon transaction data, and I'm opening this up in Microsoft Excel. Now I'm hoping that most people are familiar with how to navigate and do some basic functions in Excel, but I probably have a few advanced ones that you're going to see along the way. We're going to start off by looking at this Amazon transaction data that I have here in Excel. Now, as we look at this, let's say for a second that we want to get some basic summary statistics out of our data. And those summary statistics might consist of things such as the total price, the minimum price, the maximum price, and the average price. Now, to get those values, Excel has some functions that are baked in, and you may be familiar with some of these already. So if you want to get the sum, we'll just type in the sum function. And the same holds true for the minimum function, or the minimum value is the min function, maximum value is the max function, and the average is the word average. And we're able to get those values just like that. Right now we have basic summary data that we're displaying, but what if the business has additional questions or deeper questions? How might we answer something else? Well, let's say that the business wants to know how much is spent per year, because you want to know how much is spent per year because you're trying to forecast how much are we going to spend this year or next year. So in order to develop that forecast or to display by year, we're going to have some sort of field here that displays the year. Right now we have an order date field, which is the actual date, it's not the year. Now there's a couple ways to handle this, but one of the most common ways of handling this would be to put in a new column. And so if we come over here and we put in a new column for the year, this is now going to allow us to write a formula that is based on the year value that we're seeing here in this column. Now, the next thing that folks will probably do is they'll manually type out the years. They'll start with year 23, or they'll pick a year that is maybe far back in time, but they're not exactly sure how far back to go, and they'll start listing those years down. And then once you have those years in place, you can use Excel's SUMIF function in order to match up the year with the values that you want to pull in and summarize. Now, that's not a bad way to go about doing it, but it is manual, and we do run that risk of not capturing every single year in the output. So there's a better way, and that better way that we can use is by using a pivot table. And this pivot table is going to automate a lot of this process for us. Now, if you're new to pivot tables are just sort of this fancy thing that allows you to group data a certain way and summarize data a certain way. It takes a lot of those manual calculations out that we were just performing. So let's do the exact same thing in a pivot table. Here in the pivot table, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab that transaction year value that we created, and we're going to pull that down to the rows section. As you can see, that created a bunch of values for us in column A. And then we need to populate the total purchase price that we were looking for because we want to know how much was spent in each year. And in order to do that, we're going to grab that item total column and we're going to bring that down to the values section in the pivot table. And there you go. We have the summary of how much was spent in each year. This is exactly the same summary data that we created manually, only this time we just did it in a pivot chart. So pretty simple, right? And let's say that we want to know a little bit more about the data that we're dealing with here. So not only do we want to know how much was spent in a year, we want to know the quantities that were purchased in a year. And on top of that, why don't we calculate the average purchase price? Now, why do we want to use that? Well, let's try and think of a business case behind all of this before we dive in too deep into the work. Let's say that your business case in your household is that you have to create a budget for the next year. And in order to create your budget, you need to look at some sort of past spending data to determine how much you might spend this year. So we want to look at what was spent last year, but we kind of want to look at that trend too. Now, having this information at hand is going to help us predict, if you will, how much we might spend next year. Now, I'm not going to get into the prediction portion, but I'll just let you kind of guess at that a little bit and make your own estimate on how much might be spent in the next year. To get us started though, let's go ahead and add those unit quantities in, and let's add the average purchase price in, because we might have another business case that comes up where we want to know, if I'm out of every item that I'm buying, how many items will I purchase throughout the year, and what are each of those items going to cost me, because I'm going to have to pay my credit card bill every month, and I need to make sure that I'm not going over budget during the month. Now, to create that average price, what we're going to do is we're going to have to manually do a calculation to create this. To do this, we're going to go into column D. We're going to give it a row header here of average price per unit. And then we're just going to do the simple math on this, where we're going to take the item price and we're going to divide that by the number of units that were purchased. And that's going to give us our average. And then we'll just drag this down to the last item on the list on row 21. And that's going to show us how much was spent on average per item for each of the years that we're dealing with. Now that we've created all this data, we probably want to visualize this data, right? Because sometimes it helps to see trends a little bit better if we create charts and graphs. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that data from this pivot table plus that new column I added, and I'm just going to copy this over to a new section in Excel. The reason that I'm doing this is sometimes the pivot tables are a little bit wonky and they create issues when you go to build charts and graphs and do formulas and things of that nature. So I'm just going to copy this over, and then I'm going to use this new copied data set as my way of creating this chart and graph inside of Excel. So the first thing that I want to create in Excel is this graph that is going to show me how many dollars were spent during the year and what was the average price per item. So what we're going to end up with is a bar chart. And we're going to have two axes, right? We're going to talk about the years on the bottom, and we're going to talk about how much was spent is one axis, and then the average purchase price we're going to do as a line chart on the other axis. You're going to see how all this works in just a second. So I'm going to go a little fast through this one here, but what we're going to do is we are going to add this combo chart. And once we have the combo chart selected, we're going to select the proper fields of data that we want to include in this chart. And you can always come back and adjust this later, as you're going to see. And once that is taken care of, what I want to do next is I want to clean this up. So I want to make sure that I give a good title to my chart so it makes sense. I want to make sure that the colors look good, that they're going to show up if somebody were to share this on a screen presentation or something like that. It's important to have good colors. You don't want pastel type colors because they're just hard to see. And like yellow is one of the worst ones to see from a long distance away at a conference table or something like that. So we tend to avoid those types of colors. The other thing that I want to make sure that I do here is add the axis labels, and I want to make sure that I go through and I add the right formatting to my numbers, right? If I'm working with dollars in here, I want to have them displayed with the dollar sign and not just displayed as integers, which is how we saw them in column H and column I. So let's go ahead and clean up all that stuff so we can make a really nice looking chart. Okay, we have that beautiful looking chart. So this is one basic analysis. Now, in the corporate world or other companies, when you're doing this, you're doing stuff very similar to this. The data is going to be a little bit different. The questions are going to be a little bit different a lot of times, but sometimes you'll get questions like this. And all we're doing is putting data together and presenting it in a way that makes sense to somebody and helps them understand the business and answer the questions that they are asking. Okay, let's move on to working with Tableau. Now, before we dive into Tableau, we should talk about what Tableau is. So Tableau is a visualization tool. It's meant for doing analysis with lots of different data. So in the business environment, you have data that's in all kinds of sources, not just data that's sitting in Excel. So there's databases all over the place. And so Tableau allows you to grab data from all these different sources and bring it together into one workbook, if you will. And that makes it a little bit easier to build these visualizations. So let's say that Amazon data, well, we had to manually go out to Amazon and get that, right? What if you could directly connect to that? That's kind of the gist of what Tableau is allowing people to do. It has a lot of other features and functionality to it, but don't worry about that for right now. Just think of it as Excel. It's just a fancier version of what we're doing in Excel. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by installing Tableau because we need to get that version installed on our desktop. And then after Tableau is installed, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do this analysis. Just like we did in Excel, we'll do the exact same thing in Tableau. Now, when it comes to the installation, I'm on a Mac, so if you're on a Mac, you can follow along with me, but there's instructions out there on the internet that'll help you install on Windows. The process is basically the same thing. The installer is just slightly different. To get us started with Tableau, we're going to need to download this application and install it on our computer. Again, I am working from a Mac, so I'm going to go through and install the Mac version, but if you have a Windows version, you can do the Windows version. As we get started, we're going to go out to the Tableau website, and we're going to look for that download, and we're going to download this version of Tableau to our computer. Of course, we have to register. There's a bunch of registration forms that we're going to go through in order to get access to download this because Tableau wants your information, because that's just like how most companies work, right? So now that that's done downloading and we're ready to go, let's go ahead and start running through the installer. Now, this installer is probably like every other installer you've ever seen out there. We're just going to go through the standard motions of installing this to the right location and saying yes to all the agreements and everything else, and then we'll be up and running. Now that we have Tableau installed, we need to get the data into Tableau. Now, the way that we do this is by connecting Tableau to the existing data source that we want to work with, which happens to be that Excel file that I provided as part of the course. Now, this is going to be a little bit different from Excel because when we opened Excel, we opened up the workbook that already has the data in it. When we're opening up Tableau, we're just opening up the application and we haven't actually pulled the data into it yet. Now, you could sort of think of this like Excel. If you opened up Excel as the application and you didn't double click on the file that we're talking about here, you would just get the application open and then you'd have to somehow copy paste all that data into one of the sheets that you're working with. The same is true when we're working with Tableau. So what we're going to do here with Tableau is we are going to start off by clicking on this left-hand side where it says Microsoft Excel, and this is going to open up a dialog box that's going to allow us to select the proper file to import into the application. In this case, I'm going to select the Amazon Transactions Excel file that I provided as part of the course. I'm going to hit the OK button, and Tableau is going to go ahead and import this. And there we have it. The data has been imported by Tableau. If we look down here at the left-hand side, we see the field names that were brought in as part of the columns that were sitting there in Excel. If we look at the right-hand side here, we see the data. This is the data that was in Excel, and it's now been basically copy-pasted over into Tableau. So behind the scenes in Tableau, we have all this data sitting there, but behind the scenes, we have all this data sitting there in Tableau, but we haven't actually done anything with it yet. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start building a new sheet, just like a brand new Excel worksheet that we'd be working with. So in this sheet, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to tell Tableau to go grab some of this data that's kind of hidden behind the scenes and pull it over, and that's where we're going to start building these charts and graphs. If that sounds confusing, don't worry, it's going to make perfect sense in just a moment here as we go through the demo. Now that the data is imported, we need to do something with that data. Now we're going to go down and click on the bottom here where it says Sheet 1, and this is a new worksheet. So this is basically a blank sheet that you're going to start off with inside of Excel where you're going to create the data. You're going to surface all of that data. Now to get us started on this, what we need to take a look at here is getting certain data points on the sheet. And what data points do we want to get on the sheet? Well, what we want to put on the sheet is those years. That's the first thing. And remember, we wanted to put the total amount that was spent in a specific year. So that's what we're going to work with in this section now. To do that, what we want to do is we want to grab that order date, and we're going to bring that over to the rows section, and we're going to populate that. Now see that it automatically calculated this as a year. When we were in Excel, we had to manually create a new column to call it a year, but inside of Tableau, it does this really cool thing where it sets everything up to automatically display it as a year. You can drill down to a specific date if you wanted to. I'm not going to get into that, but there's all sorts of cool things that Tableau will do for you. The next thing that we want to do is we want to get the dollar values brought over. So we're going to come over here and we're going to grab that item total. And we're just going to drag it over to this little section and drop it on this text marker here. And that's going to automatically add the dollar values summed up into the column, a new column that we're looking for. Pretty cool, right? Okay, now that we have that data point taken care of, the next thing that we want to do is we want to put in a column that has that average price per unit. Now remember, when we were working in Excel, we had to go through and manually calculate that. We took the item amount and we divided that item amount by the quantity. Now, if we look at the left-hand side here inside of Tableau, we don't have a calculated field for that, or a column of data if we want to call it that. So just like Excel, we need to create that. So I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to right click in the section and I'm going to create this new calculated field. Now in this window that opens up, I'm going to give it a title and I'm going to call this the average price per unit. And then in this box, this is where I'm going to type in the formula. Again, feels fairly similar to what you're doing inside of Excel. It's just that the user interface is a little bit different. Now in this section, I have to tell it I want the sum of the total item amount or the item total amount, and the next thing that I need to do is divide that by the sum of the quantities that were purchased. I'm going to go ahead, hit apply, hit OK, and you can see on the left-hand side here that I have a new field that exists for this average price per unit. Now, if I want to bring that into my chart that I have, or my spreadsheet, if you want to think of it that way, I'm just going to go ahead and drag that value over just like I did before, and there we go. Again, I can go through and I can reformat this data to put the dollar sign in front of it to clean it up and make it look really good. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to make sure that this doesn't have any decimal points. We'll let it round, and there we go. Now, if we want to do a side-by-side check, you can see here we have Excel and then you have your Tableau version, and these values are identical between the two sheets. Okay, so that's really awesome. Now, the next thing that we want to do is create that chart and graph, and we can do that inside of Tableau just like we did inside of Excel. Now, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to duplicate this sheet. This makes it a lot easier, and this is just like you would do inside of Excel. So I'm going to right click this, I'm going to duplicate the sheet. Okay, so now that we've duplicated the sheet, what do we do from there? It's still in that spreadsheet form, and we need to make it look like that chart and graph. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if we go over to this right-hand side here, we'll see a bunch of different icons here that are different displays that we can select from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the middle section here. I'm going to click on this one that has some bars and a line on it. And this is going to be our dual chart, or combo chart as Excel would call it. And you can see here that it automatically populated what we were looking for. So that's perfect. We have the bar. If we hover over the bar, we can see that this is the total dollar value. And if we hover over the line, we'll be able to see here that this is the average price per unit. Now it looks great, except for the colors aren't exactly what we were going for. So let's go ahead and fix the colors. Now to fix the colors on this, you can just click on the line, or you can come over here to this left-hand side and make sure that you're selected on the right field that you're looking for, or column of data that you're looking for. We'll hit this color option. The next thing I'm going to do is select this average price per unit. I'm going to go ahead and make this purple because that's the color that we used inside of Excel. I'm going to hit the apply and the OK button, and here we go. Now we have that purple line and the blue bars, and this looks wonderful. So this looks identical, or nearly identical, to what we did inside of Excel. Pretty cool, right? So that was your first lesson on going through Tableau. It's really about that easy to get set up. Yes, there's a lot more nuanced things and complex things in there that you'll learn in my other courses, but this is fun. This is a really great way to start visualizing your data. And again, Tableau allows you to work with much bigger data sets than what you're able to get inside of Excel. So this is a really powerful tool. Okay, now that we've gone through this, we need to go over and start working with the database side of things. So I'm going to walk over there and show you how to work with a database, and I'll tell you a little bit about what a database is first so I don't make this confusing or anything else like that. So let's get started. To help you understand what a database is and how a database works, I want to look at Excel real quick. So if we look at this Excel document, we can see here that in Excel terms, we have rows and we have columns. So if I create columns under column C, D, and E, and I call them column 1, column 2, and column 3, that all seems to make sense, right? We use that term column inside of Excel, and then we have rows. So I'm creating row 1, 2, and 3. Now, when we're looking at a database uses similar terminology, sometimes the same, sometimes just slightly different. So when we're talking about a database, one of the things that we might see, instead of calling them columns, you might hear them referred to as fields. So instead of column 1, 2, and 3, it is field 1, 2, and 3. But the rows are called rows almost all the time. So in this example, we'll call them rows. Now, there's some other terminology that you might hear, such as attributes and records. So instead of calling something a column or a field, we might hear it referred to as an attribute. Just know that attribute and field and column, they all mean the same thing. When it comes to rows, yes, sometimes they're called rows, but other times you'll hear it referred to as a record. The next thing that we need to talk about with data in Excel versus a database is that in Excel, we had a sheet of data. So we have a worksheet that we're dealing with, or a sheet, and it contains a specific set of data. Inside of a database, it's called a table. It's not called a sheet, just called a table, but the concept is the same. You have a similar grouping of data or a group of data that you're just saving off into this table. So here's a side-by-side example of the terminology that we're using with Excel on the left and the SQL database on the right. In Excel, we use sheets, and we have within the sheet, there's columns and there's rows. In the SQL database, we have a table instead of a sheet, and we have fields or attributes. Sometimes you'll hear it as columns, but mainly fields or attributes. And then you have records or rows that are being used instead of always calling them rows. The next thing that I want to talk about here is how a database actually works. So we know how the data is structured. How does data actually flow, and how do you talk to this database? Well, the way that we talk to this database is normally through a browser or some other application that is specifically designed to talk to the database. In this example here, I'm going to show you a browser-based version. So you would go to Chrome, Firefox, or Safari, and you would go to your company's website, and you would log in to the database, and you would see a screen that probably looks similar to this. Now, on this screen here, we have a little section that we're going to put our query in. Now, that's just the language, that's a code that we're using to talk to the database. I'll get more into that in a second here, but you'll put some code in there, and that code is just instructions that's telling the database what you want to do. And then you hit the submit button. So what happens after you hit the submit button? When you hit the submit button, those instructions are sent from your computer's browser, and they're sent over to the database server. So we have a server, so think of your laptop that you're working with. On your laptop, there would be an application which is called the database. And within that database, you have all the data. So all these tables that we want to create, those are nested inside the database. So we are creating code that's saying, go talk to this database, and then go talk to this table, and get me the data out of this table, and then send it back to me. That's all that we're telling the computer to do. So after hitting the submit button, all of that happens, and then when the data is pulled from the database, it sends it across the internet and sends it back over to your browser, and you see the results show up on your screen. Now, this is similar to Excel, right? We're still looking at data. We just had to use sort of a middle person to go get the data for us. We had to go give instructions to somebody else, and that instructions was to the SQL database, and then the SQL database ran and came back. So it's kind of like a TaskRabbit, if you will. In order to perform our analysis inside of SQL, we're going to need a database to connect to. Now, the big companies, they all have a database already installed on their computers, and we can't connect into those, so we're going to install a database on our computer. But it's pretty simple to get going, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. What we're going to do is we're going to go over to this website here, which is the SQLitestudio.pl website, and this website has a download on it for us to download a database and then get that installed on our computer. So we're just going to go ahead and click the download button. And as soon as that finishes up, we're going to go ahead and open up that installer. Now, I'm on a Mac, so my version here that you're looking at might look slightly different, but I'll just double click on this installation file, and I'm going to go through the normal motions that you always go through when you're installing the application. Now, one thing to call out on a Mac, sometimes some people's Macs require you to go into the preferences and hit that little unlock button to install a third-party application on your computer, so keep that in mind if you run into that sort of issue on a Mac. It just might come up on your computer. It's not coming up on mine this time. And there you have it. We have our database application installed. Now, we haven't created the actual database and we haven't created those tables or any of the data yet. We've just installed the application, which gives us the means to do everything within it. Now, I like to think of this like a house and a piece of property, for example. So we have the raw land. We have the ability to put stuff on the land, and so we can get a house, we can build a house, we can put things inside the house, but we haven't done any of that yet. So all we've done is created the land essentially by installing this application. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create the database. Now, the database is a container for everything. Now, you can think of this like a closet, for example. When you have a closet at home, your closet contains things. And what is inside your closet? Well, you have different sections inside your closet. You have a section for shoes, a section for hanging shirts. You have some shelves that are in there to put other things on. We're essentially going to do the same thing with a database where we have this new closet. So when we create the database, that's your closet. The database is going to contain everything. Now, once we have the database installed, we need to have little sections to contain our data. So just like those Excel sheets, we need a little section. So if we relate this again to the closet example, we're going to have a table for shoes. We might have a table for hanging shirts. Those are just your sections of data that we're looking at. Now, hopefully that makes sense. If not, we'll get into that a little bit deeper in some additional lessons, but just know at a surface level, that's what we're talking about and some of the motions that we're going to go through here in just a moment. To get us started with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that database within our application. Now, this is just going to be our demo database that we're going to use. So Intro to Analytics database is what I want to create for us. And once I have that created, in another chapter here later on, we're going to go through and we're going to actually create a table, and then we're going to put some data inside that table. So let's go ahead and get started with that creation process. Now that you know a little bit about the database, it's time to get started working on our analysis. So we're going to go back to what we were doing in Excel and what we did in Tableau, and we're going to do the same thing inside of SQL this time. So the way that we're going to get started with this is I'm going to go over here to my database, and I am going to right-click on this to create a new table. And remember, this table is just a container for that data set that we want to have. Much like inside of Excel, we had a sheet. That sheet is a container for the data. So I'm going to go ahead and give this table a name for Amazon transactions because that's what we're dealing with. That's what the data set is. And now that we have the table name, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start defining the columns or the fields that I need to have in the table. Now, again, like Excel, this is like going across row number 1 for column A, B, and C and putting the column name in front of it. We're doing the exact same thing. It just looks a little bit different the way we're going about it. Now, the other thing that you'll notice here as I'm creating the name is that I'm specifying a data type. Now, again, you can do the same thing inside of Excel. So if you had a field that you want to make it a date field or you want to make it a currency field, we can do the same thing in the database. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about the different data types that are available and how you are supposed to use them properly, but just know that's very similar to Excel. Now that we have all of the field names created, we're going to go ahead and hit this commit button. This commit is saying I want you to basically save it to the database. So we're going to look at this pop-up window. We're going to double check and make sure that everything looks good. And we're going to go ahead and submit this. And this is going to create our table. Okay, we've got our table created now. Let's go ahead and run a set of instructions or a command on this table to get the results of the table. So what we're doing here is we're saying select, and that means that we're telling it we want to get something back. So I want you to select a bunch of data or get me a bunch of data out of the table. Now the command that I'm doing here with the select, and I'm putting in the star. Now what is star? Star is a shortcut for basically saying, give me all of the columns that are available inside this database table. That just alleviates you from having to type out each specific column name that you want. We're just going to take the shortcut method for right now. Now the next thing that I'm typing in here in this SQL command is the from statement. And this is telling the database that I want to select star from where? Well, I have to tell the database where to go get the data because there could be multiple tables. So this is like saying, can you go get me all of the data off of sheet 1? What I'm telling the database is, can you go get me all of the rows and columns off of, in this case, we're going to say the Amazon transactions table. And that's what you see here. That from statement is from the Amazon transactions table. As you can see, there's no results that got returned. And why is that? Well, it's because we didn't put any data in the table, right? All we did is create this structure for the table. We have a table, we have columns that we know that we want to put data in and underneath those columns, but we didn't move the data. So let's go ahead and put the data in the table now. To put the data in the table, what we're going to do is we're going to right click here and we're going to go to import, and we're going to select the CSV file, not the Excel file. We're going to select the CSV file for the Amazon transactions that we were working with. And I'm going to make sure that I've told the database that it has this header row. It has some column names on it. So we don't want to import the column names because we already defined them in the table. We just want the actual data to come across. And that all looks good there. So I'm going to go ahead and import it. Now the import is done. We just need to do a double check and make sure our data is actually in the table. Again, to do that, we're just going to tell the database to select all of the rows that are in the database table, all the rows, all the columns. And we're telling it from this Amazon transactions table. So select all the data within the Amazon transactions table, and here's the results that we get. So we're able to see data in the database table, but we should double check and do a little bit of quality assurance or QA on the table to make sure that everything loaded. Now to do that, one of the ways to QA is to count the number of records that are in the table. And there's a command for that, just like in Excel, where we can do a count. So let's take that select star out and let's do a count star. And this just means count all of the records again. So here we see the number of records that are in the table. And if we go look at Excel, we can see in Excel that we have the same number of records. Now keep in mind when I highlight in Excel, it's counting the header row, and the database table doesn't count a header row, so that's why it's going to be off by 1, but we have the same number of records here. The next thing that we can do as a double check is to look at the total dollars that were spent during the last year. And this is a sum function again that we're going to go ahead and use just like we did in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and write the sum function out, and in this case, you're seeing me write the sum items total. And I'm using this as keyword here, and I'm giving it a new name. And this new name is total purchase dollars. Well, that's called an alias. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but it allows me just to give a different column name than what is normally going to be pushed out by the database. So it's a way of renaming your columns in your output. Again, we see that we have the output, the total dollars, and if we go back over to Excel, we can see that it matches what we were seeing there. So it's the same data, just a slightly different way of pulling the results in a different tool. So what else can we do? Well, we can do almost anything inside of SQL and the database. Just like Excel at the beginning, when we did that min and max and we summed up the quantity, we can do the exact same thing here. So I'm going to go ahead and type out those commands, and these are going to return the min dollars that were spent, the max dollars that were spent on a transaction, and the total number of units that were purchased over the last year. Now, if we really want to get this to the point of where we were with Excel and Tableau, we need to get that average cost per unit. Now, to do that, just like you would do in Excel, there's an average function that we can work with here. So to do that, we're going to take the sum of the total dollars divided by the sum of the total units that were purchased. Pretty cool, right? Okay, well, now that we have that, that's all summary data, right? That's the aggregate data. That's all of the data that was looked at. We didn't break it out based on the year. And when we worked in Tableau and Excel, we wanted to break everything out based on the calendar year so we could see the total quantity purchased, the dollars purchased, and we were looking at that average price. So let's go ahead and make an adjustment here to their code. And in this code, what we need is that order date, remember? So we had that order year before that we used inside of Tableau, and it automatically gave us, well, we had order date inside of Tableau, but it automatically gave us the order year. But inside of Excel, we had the order date, but we had to create a new column called order year. Now inside of SQL, we have this order date, and we're going to go ahead and run this, but I'm going to show you what happens. This is going to be an error of sorts. It's going to be a bug of sorts, or not give us the results that we're looking for, and I'll explain why. So I have the order date in here. The next thing I needed to use is this command called group by. And this is saying, I want you to sum up the data or aggregate or calculate the data based on a specific field. So what it's doing is saying, give me all of the data that's related to 2023. And then if I look at only those records for 2023, I want you to add those up and then make the calculation for the average price per unit. And I want you to go grab all the data from 2022, and I want you to do the same thing. And that's what it's doing behind the scenes, is that group by function is saying, I want you to calculate over just this small set of data. Now, when I run this, you see that we don't get the results that we want. When we look at the result set, we have a lot of values that are the same for different years. So it doesn't look like this worked properly. And that's because it tried to calculate everything based on the order date, not the order year. We didn't tell the computer to translate the date into a year. So in order to do that, I have to write a special function here to do this. I'm not going to get into the details here because I want to keep this really high level. And this is just more calling out that there's lots of little things to learn that are really cool about the database and the language. And as you learn more about this and gain more experience, you'll be able to do some of these really cool things too. And there you have it. Now we have our results that are divided up based on the year. And this looks identical to what we saw in Tableau and in Excel. Pretty cool, right? That is using SQL. Now, hopefully that wasn't too daunting for you. I know there's a lot to learn, but you will learn this very, very fast. The language is pretty intuitive once you get used to it, and it just takes small steps to get you going. Once you get going, you'll be off to the races and having lots of fun inside the database. Okay, my friends, that is the last part of the demo. Now, inside of SQL, we didn't do any charting or graphing. And if you're wondering why, it's because you can't do it inside of SQL. SQL is just the data in the database, and all we're doing is talking to the database to put data in and take data out. It doesn't have the capabilities of making those pretty charts and graphs. If you want to make those charts and graphs, what you have to do is you have to take that data, that result set that we got from the database, and you have to export it out, either copy paste it or you have to save it off into a file. And once there, you can open it up inside of Excel and you can create those charts and graphs, or you can load it into Tableau where you can create those charts and graphs. So you might be asking yourself, well, if I can't create charts and graphs, why do I use SQL in the first place? Well, it's because SQL is super powerful and the database is super powerful, way more powerful than Tableau or Excel could ever be. So you think about this for a moment. If you have billions and billions of records, we know that it's not possible to load those inside of Excel, and we know that inside of Tableau, we took an Excel or a CSV file and we loaded it up. So if it doesn't fit into Excel or a reasonable size CSV, you're not going to be able to get into Tableau. And that's the gist of it here, where if you have billions of records, you can't just import them into something like Tableau to do your analysis and to do the charts and graphs. What you do is you utilize SQL to kind of reduce the data down to something more manageable, and then you take it from SQL and you move it over to those other tools that will let you put those nicer visualizations on top of them. Now, hopefully all of that makes sense. So here's a couple things I'm going to leave you with on the rest of the demo. So we've finished the demo. Now I'd like you to go back and try the demo out for yourself. Try going through and looking at that sample data, do some of the work inside of Excel, build those charts and graphs and custom columns, and then try and take that Excel data into Tableau and build the chart and graph over there, and try to go into SQL as well, download the database, install the database, and then load the data in and try and run some of those commands just like I did. Now, if that seems like it might be a little too nerve-wracking to do, or maybe you don't know the commands well enough yet, don't worry. I know that I didn't go in depth on any of those commands at this time. I do that in a different course. This course was designed to give you a really good overview of the tools and some of the things that we do when we perform an analysis, and I hope that I communicated that fairly well to you for this course. After you go back through this section of the course and play around with the data on your own and do your own analysis, I'll meet you back over at the course wrap-up section. All right, my friends, you completed my Introduction to Analytics course. This course was a very high-level course. We moved pretty fast talking about how to use Excel, Tableau, and SQL for the tools of the trade to do an analysis. Now, again, I did not go into super deep details on anything that we worked with here, and I did move a little bit fast on some of the commands, but my goal was not to teach you how to use the tools or how to understand the language, the SQL language that we use when we're being analysts. My goal was merely to give you an introduction to what we do in the field and what some of the tools look like and how easy they might be able to be used once you come up to speed. Now, if you're feeling a little bit nervous, wondering, oh my gosh, that sounds complicated or the language seems harder, I don't know what to do, don't worry about that. We all start from some place, and that some place is usually ground zero. And what we'll end up doing is we'll just learn the skills just like you learned English. You look back today and probably wonder, I don't even remember learning English. You just learned it. The same thing's going to be true with learning how to write SQL. And the same is probably true as you learned how to use a computer or you do anything in your job today. It's all going to come to you pretty quickly and pretty easily as we get in motion. Now, what I'd encourage you to do is to keep your excitement up. I hope you're excited. I'm excited for you. And I want you to continue learning on this path because there's so much potential for you in the analytics field. Now, I have other courses that will help you learn right from the basic level all the way up to an expert level data analyst, and you're going to learn the language, you're going to learn the tools, you're going to get the hands-on practice that you need to become a data analyst. And if you're already a data analyst, I'm going to help you bring your skills up to the very best level of analysts that are out there. I hope that you really enjoyed this course. I'm really excited that you're interested in this field, and I hope that you continue on this path. So please check out my other courses because I'd love to help make you the best analyst that's out there.